Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Carl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, last year, Creane Creane and Escorty was sold to the PIB Group, and over the past few days, the long-established brokerage has undergone another change as it was rebranded as Campion Insurances. Tony Doyle of Campion Insurances joins us now to tell us more. Tony, before we discuss this latest change, I would like to get an insight into your own career in insurance.
Hi, Carl. Yes, I suppose I started out in insurance in Stephen's Green, putting policy documents in envelopes for Guardian Royal Exchange as they were, and now known as AXA. And then I told the sales director that I could do this job that I absolutely wasn't qualified to do, and but he gave it to me, and I went in as a regional manager initially in Drogheda, and then finished off in Cork in 89, and moved back to Creane Creane then in 1990.
So Creane Creane was the quintessential family business, and you succeeded your father-in-law, Michael Mahon, as the managing director of the brokerage. So what was your plan for the business when you took it over at the time?
I suppose Michael, in fairness, had the foresight to see that he needed to change things and bring in fresh blood. I suppose my job was to develop the commercial book and schemes, and I even remember we had a website, Creane Creane Direct. So that was my responsibility to do that, and look, thankfully we were very successful in becoming one of the largest brokers within the region.
And of course, Tony, your own background had been working for insurance companies. That must have been very beneficial because you had been in and out of many insurance brokerages right across the country for so long. So what did you learn from those brokers that you were able to bring in then to Creane Creane?
Yes, well, I suppose you could see the different approaches that the different brokers took. A big thing at the time, Carl, was the whole software, because I suppose back then, there was lots of, paper records and there was no great efficiencies. So I was kind of, I suppose, educated in the software house a bit, and so we were able to implement a new system, and it was called Relay at the time. And I suppose we were one of the first brokers in the country to basically moved on to what they called our work centre, which was basically the system they have today.
And talk to us about how you went about developing the commercial arm of the business then.
I basically followed the approach that Willie Creane and Michael would have taken, and PJ, Michael's brother, who was basically get out there and knock doors. And that's as simple as that. It was just literally getting out there, introducing yourself. And I suppose I had a massive advantage, Carl, because it wasn't that I was just some greenhorn coming out. You were going out with the Creane Creane badge there since 1945. So it was a huge benefit. You weren't selling the company, you were just selling yourself.
For any insurance brokerage that has a commercial focus, it's all about relationships, isn't it?
Oh, huge. I mean, I suppose it was the one thing, when we were going through this due diligence, which was great fun. But they were looking at the retention rates, and they just didn't believe them at first. I mean, we were looking on commercial there, you're looking at 99% retention each month. I mean, we just weren't, we've some fantastic, we've customers, the third generation.
Where's the magic sauce in relation to going out and developing and maintaining these relationships?
I suppose you have to put yourself in the position that you're working, you're an employee of that company, that you're there to manage their insurance needs and protect them and make sure, and as long as you take it personally, and I always took it personally, I suppose, that's massive. And I think customers see that then, and hence I think you get the loyalty from that.
Over the past number of years, we've seen some huge UK insurance brokers entering the Irish market and gobbling up smaller regional brokers across the country. Last year, Creane Creane was acquired by the specialist UK insurance brokerage PIB Group. Were you actively positioning the business as an acquisition target at that time, Tony?
No, it's actually quite a funny one, because Jim Campion, who's I have to deny this later on, but he's a lifetime friend of 25 years, and Jim and I had looked at jointly buying another brokerage probably about 2 months beforehand, and I said I just got a number of approaches, and I said it wasn't on the radar at all.
So how did it come about?
I suppose from PIB's perspective, another good friend of mine in London, Richard Scott, has a wholesale business called CityNet, who had sold to PIB, and I had a number of approaches from other people, and I remember I rang Richard and he said, look, why don't you talk to the boys that acquired us. He said they were very good and very decent. And basically he set up a phone call, and I said it was during COVID, so actually never got to meet the people until the deal was done. But it was simple. I had a number of conversations with Brendan McManus and Ryan Brown, who's the CEO and CFO. And I was at home at the time, and I just went into Olive and I said, Olive, we have to sell to these people. I just had a good feeling about them. I knew they were decent people, and it's been proven.
Why was then the right time to sell, Tony?
It's a good question, Carl, considering I hadn't planned it. I suppose it's the way the business is going. We were chatting there earlier, and I suppose I gave you a story there where I sat in the kitchen of a very good client and friend of mine, and when I was telling him what was happening, and he said, "Well, why are you doing it? Like Creane Creane is doing well. What's the need for this?" And I said to him, "It's very simple." I said, "I can look at you in the eye now and say I've got you the best deal that's out there, but in 3 years' time, I'll be answering that in a different way by saying it's the best deal I can get you, and that's a different answer."
So does that mean that you would have been limited in terms of the insurers that you would have had access to, or would it have meant that you wouldn't have been able to get as competitive rates as the bigger players, or both, Tony?
Yeah, and probably more so the latter, Carl. That they'll give preferential rates maybe to the bigger players, and that's what I was concerned about.
From a cultural perspective, how important was getting somebody to acquire the business to protect the integrity of the organisation and to protect that of your staff as well within it?
Yeah, look, it was huge. I suppose I knew from my dealings with Richard in London the way they had operated in the UK with a number of their acquisitions, and it just felt a really good fit. And I suppose the only engagement I had with them for about 6 months were all staff related. How are the staff? Do they need this? Do they need that? So that was a really good sign early on that they genuinely care, and they've signed a long-term lease to stay in Enniscorthy, and so the same people are there, and they're all quite happy.
So Tony, am I right in saying that you engaged exclusively with the PIB Group and you discounted any other approach that you had?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now. It was all quite fuzzy at the time. I suppose we had 3 approaches before PIB, but once I engaged with PIB, I just felt it was the right call.
And what changes have they made since they've become part of Creane Creane?
Very little, really, Carol. I mean, it was very much hands-off, light, soft touch. So they let us really carry on the way we always had done. I mean, the business was running well, and so their attitude was just, if it ain't broken, don't fix it.
So from a growth perspective then, how is becoming part of the PIB Group been of benefit to Creane Creane?
Yeah, I suppose we'll start to see the benefit of that more so going forward, because I suppose there's 2 angles to this. So you have PIB in the UK, so accessing markets in the additional markets in the UK, and it's pretty much in the early stage because a lot of the UK underwriters just won't trade in Ireland.
Why is that?
It's the claims culture. I remember at one stage, maybe about 3 years ago, I think about 12 underwriters left the market in the space of 3 months. They just couldn't make money here, and but I suppose now going forward, we have the Campion Group in Ireland. It's there's 12 different offices around the country. There's north of 150 million turnover. So that gives us quite a bit of clout.
PIB Group came into the country. Their first acquisition was Creane Creane in Enniscorthy, and then from there they went on and they bought Jim Campion's business, Campion Insurances, of course, originally from Urlingford, but with a good national presence at this stage. So at that point then PIB recently made the decision that they're going to use the Campion Insurance brand to represent them in Ireland, which means that Creane Creane have to change their name, and did so on Thursday last to Campion Insurances. How did you feel about that?
Oh, Carl, look, I pulled on a lot of heartstrings, I'll be honest. It probably still is. But I suppose, I always go back to a conversation I had with my father-in-law, and when I was telling him what was happening, and he said, I have to go down and tell Mrs. Creane what's happening. And I said, no. And he wasn't too happy about that. And needless to know, I said, well, now you know how I feel telling you what's going on. So he went down to Mrs. Creane, who was 101 at the time. And he said, Mrs. Creane, I have some bad news for you. Creane Creane has been sold to PIB, blah, blah, blah. And Mrs. Creane said, why would I be upset, Michael? That's progress. So if a 101-year-old can say that, it says it all.
That has to be admired. Talk to me about the impact that this rebrand to Campion Insurances will have, if any, on your customers.
Other than the sign on the door and headed paper, Carl, there's really no change. I mean, it's the same people. I'm still there. The team are still there. And I suppose we have a lot more support from being part of a bigger group, administratively wise, etc. So I don't think people will see any difference.
What is your role in the group, and were you tempted at all by the allure of retirement after the sale?
I'd be divorced, Carl. No, I didn't give it a minute's thought. I've been hugely involved, and it's kind of unusually too. A lot of brokers, the CEO is basically doesn't have a massive amount of engagement with customers. On the other hand, I was quite the opposite because I had, and I could do that because we'd super people inside to run things, which allowed me to engage more with customers. So I'm still continuing to look after the customers, everything from someone's car, if they ring me up a problem or whatever. And recently, I've taken up the role of head of personal lines, which is basically for the Campion Group in Ireland, which is basically motor insurance, home insurance, travel insurance. So I'm getting stuck into that at the minute. So
what are your big goals in relation to the personal lines?
Yeah, the personal lines is always a tricky one because, it's rates on private car insurance, go up and down, and it's always difficult. So you're trying to, it's all about getting deals. And so obviously, look, we're in a growth mode. It's that trajectory is continuing. And I suppose it's just going to involve a lot more engagement with underwriters just to make sure that we're getting the best value for our customers. And
of course, you touched upon it there in terms of rates. Insurance is incredibly cyclical. Rates go up, rates go down, as we know. Where are we in the current cycle?
All right, I'll get out the crystal ball for you now. I think it's quite positive, Carl. I think the COVID, times, insurers made a lot of money. There was a lot of cars parked up, and I know there was some minor discounts given. So I think the insurance companies are in a good place from a profitability point of view. Now that goes up and down as well, as you know. But I'd be hopeful that there's so much pressure on people's costs at the moment with everything that's going on. I don't see any more upward movement on rates in the next 12 months.
Now, Tony, of course, you've been in the insurance industry for longer than you care to remember at this stage. But in your opinion, what are the major opportunities and challenges facing the industry over the next 5 years?
Well, how long have we got? Look, I suppose there's people are a problem. Like getting staff is a massive problem, and it's in every industry. So there's nothing new here there. Regulation for the smaller broker is going to become very, very difficult. To me, I suppose, it's people. It is the single biggest problem.
And to be fair to the government, they did introduce an insurance apprenticeship some time back. How successful has that been?
I think it's been more successful in centres, the likes of, say, Limerick, Dublin, Cork. It's not something we saw much of here. Now, I suppose it's quite insular, but from our own site in Enniscorthy, we have people that have been there longer than I'm there. So we always were able to get young people and train them up because we had enough experience, and then we brought people up the way we did business.
Tony, I'm conscious as well, we've seen a lot of consolidation within the insurance broker market here in Ireland in recent years. Is that a trend that you expect to continue?
Yes, it is, Carl. I think, if you look at Wexford, Waterford, Carlow, Kilkenny, Wicklow, I can't think of off the top of my head now, there may be, but I can't think of one independent broker left, and that's replicated across the country. So I think it will continue. How long? And there's still quite a number of players. So it's not just PIB that are, I suppose, expanding. There are quite a number of them expanding. So I think you're going to obviously be left with a lot less brokers, but you'll also have a lot of brokers who'll have a lot more clout when they're dealing with insurance companies.
Will we be left with many Irish-owned brokerages in the country in 5 years' time, in your opinion?
No, I don't. You'll count them on one hand, I believe.
And how would you respond to the criticism that such high levels of consolidation is bad for an industry, ultimately making the bigger players bigger and reducing competition?
There's still plenty of competition, Carl. You're probably looking at, you've got Gallagher's, Brown & Brown, PIB, Aston Lark, the Marshes and the Aons and the Willis. Like, there's plenty of competition out there.
And finally, Tony, what are your plans for developing and growing Campion Insurances in Enniscorthy over the next number of years?
Yeah, so look, we're very positive. I said to you, we've a fantastic crew of people, and I know people can say that lightly, but I'm not. I'm genuinely mean this. Like, we've a fantastic crew. PIB are there for the long term in Enniscorthy. Our Campions, there's a long term lease there, and we've seen some good growth over the last number of years. It's continuing, and I'm very positive that it'll continue that way.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Tony Doyle from Campion Insurances, and I'd like to thank Tony for joining us in the studio this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Carl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.